Listening to Edge Radio 99.3 FM. Why am I on?
Where is that coming from?
It might come from here. And this is Media Mothership. With Craig Norris. Talking with Dr. Emerald King. I reckon it's the volume on that computer.
On this? So
Yep.
I'll turn that on mute.
Found the echo.
That's down.
Alright, so here on Media Mothership, we explore everything in and around the world of popular culture, entertainment, and weird oddities, all of which are symbolised by our wonderful guest, Dr. Emerald King, who's come in to talk about a fantastic festival that's just around the corner in Hobart called the Festival of the Fantastical Japan World of... here we go. Festival of the Fantastic in Australia and Japanese Arts. The little blurb for it is that the Australian Japan Foundation has come in with some great funding across Sydney, Hobart, Brisbane and Yokohama, which is an interesting kind of... Is it a pentagram that creates? Is it some kind of awakening of Cthulhu that those locations were selected on a map?
It's
that they bring about something?
It's a square that's not square.
That's right, because we're cool dudes. I'm thinking of Pulp Fiction now and that kind of square dude image. So it is a square, but it's not square because it's not for squares.
It's not for squares, it's for hips.
So, Emerald, tell me a bit about the Fantastic in Australian and Japanese Arts, which is about to be rolled out here in Hobart.
So it is a festival running, as you've said, across 4 locations. Kicked off in Sydney in July with an event at the Japan Foundation Sydney, not to be confused with the Australia-Japan Foundation, where we were lucky to work with artist Konoike Tomoko and her fantastic contribution to the Storymakers exhibition, which is currently on at Japan Foundation Sydney. It's now coming to Hobart next weekend, September 3, before it moves back up to Sydney, and then some events in Brisbane and Yokohama in November. Our events in Hobart are based around the idea of crafting fantasy, crafting narratives. So there's an exhibition running at the Morris Miller at the moment, which is, I believe, open to the public, normal opening hours 8 to 5. And then open to students or anybody with swipe access after hours, which looks at how writers write, and that shows the work of a number of Australian artists. And then the September 3 and 4 events include a day or an afternoon of world building exercises with, again, fantastic Australian authors who are authoring Australian fantasy. A crafting circle and also a cosplay event.
There's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on.
So the Morris Miller Library, that's the one on Sandy Bay campus, where our studio's based, ground zero for Media Mothership. That's the Morris Miller Library here at UTAS campus on Sandy Bay.
Yes.
And open to the public. Anyone can rock up during opening hours.
During opening hours. And I think the you must be fully vaccinated to come onto any UTAS campus, but there are no mask restrictions and the buildings that are public have been unlocked, which they weren't for, I believe, most of the pandemic.
So someone will walk into the library possibly and they'll be confronted by fantasy.
Behind a glass cabinet, yes.
Can you give us a clue? Like when I think of fantasy, I'm thinking either maybe high fantasy, high fantasy would be the kind of, is that like Tolkien and Lord of the Rings? But it's Japan, Australia fantasy. So is this Ghibli? I guess for many people they think maybe it's Studio Ghibli, that's fantasy.
Oh, it definitely is. And we could go into a whole tangent about old isekai and new isekai.
Isekai is Portal.
Is Portal
fiction?
fantasy,
Right.
which...
Alice in Wonderland.
Yep.
Tron.
Yes.
because they're the top two
Yep.
order fantasies,
And
right? The
we
1980s.
don't need to mention new isekai because
Isekai.
that's less nice.
Jumanji.
Mm.
I've never actually seen it.
Oh, wow.
Or the reboot. Or played the game.
That's okay, because this show is all about locating motherships from which other materials spawn from. So, in the library, what are the key motherships that people could locate? Like we're talking
what are the key
some
spawning
authors.
points?
Like we've got Daniel Woods.
We've got Daniel
Stuff.
Woods, we've got Tanzarina Roberts, we have
Is that the Wolf connection? Is that Wolf? I was trying to look
There's,
at some
there's
of
lots of wolves.
The wolves.
There's lots of wolves.
Yeah, what was the
Well,
wolf?
the wolves are everywhere. It's all wolves and foxes. So one of my long-time obsessions has been writing about fox wives. 2022 is a big year for the fox wife, which we can pick up later on, speaking of spawn points.
Because in Japanese fantasy, you have the many-tailed fox.
You do, and the biggest, baddest many-tailed fox of them all escaped this year.
Really?
Did you know?
Like it was in a zoo and it got out?
In March
Like
22.
a fictional zoo?
No.
It's a fictional animal? It's not real.
She's Tamamano Maya is one of the 3 greatest calamities to ever befall Japan.
Oh,
She was turned into a rock in the 1100s in the Nasu Plain, and that rock split in March 2022.
Split? Like
Split.
unexplained phenomena split?
I mean,
or like
the-
a construction worker being
No,
like they
just-
were mining
just-
for fracking?
Just split,
Right,
just
right.
opened.
Right.
There is a natural explanation for it. There are various legends and stories that her spirit had already been put to rest, as well as put to waste. But yeah, just look out for any impossibly beautiful figures behind world leaders. I'd say sometime
Because
in
she's
2023.
a shapeshifter, right?
She's a shapeshifter.
In myth. In
Yep.
Japanese myth.
And so she's kind of traced through India, China, and then she gets to Japan, hangs out with a lot of world leaders at the time.
This is like, we're talking BC?
We're talking
AD? Early AD?
I think the earliest mention of this kind of a fox spirit is in India in around 500 AD to around 1100 in Japan. But this is completely off topic.
Oh, well, but if you're interested in foxes and wolves, there is
There
the
is.
world building.
There is the world building
Session.
session where you can come and build your own wolves. But I bring it up.
You can bring. Sorry, you're burying the lead.
I am.
so you can build your own wolf.
You could build your own wolf world.
Wolf world.
Wolf world. So the wolf connection, it wasn't intended. It's just something that's happened. So the art exhibition in Sydney.
Mm-hmm. And that's linked to Masafumi Monden.
That is, so yes, a Masafumi
Great doctor.
Monden, amazing scholar. I can't believe I get to work with him. And Lucy Fraser are my co-conspirators, as I
From
like to call
Queensland?
us. University of Queensland, yep. So we're kind of in control of the Australian events, and then we're working with James Welker, who, if you're into boys' love
Yeah.
studies, you'll know him, and Mayako Murai, who...
And that's the Kanagawa Yokohama.
That's Kanagawa, Yokohama.
connection.
Yeah. So that's why are we this not square? Because that's where all of my friends are.
James is great. He took me on a walking tour of jazz bars in Yokohama.
Yes.
So it's wonderful to have someone of his stature and cultural tastes involved here.
Yeah, we're incredibly lucky with the connections that we've made. Some would argue that James himself is a silver fox.
Yes. Yeah. So there is. I mean, it's interesting the people that you've brought together to be able to put together this festival of fantasy. Queensland, Sydney, Yokohama, and
Grand Central.
Hobart.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I knew that. And Hobart. You've got a great team you've built together. What did you all agree upon were the core defining kind of sensibilities you wanted to bring into it? Because it's not just, we want manga, right? It's a lot broader than that.
There's actually not any manga or anime
There's none in
involved.
there,
There's
is there?
none.
Except for the cosplay stuff at a tangent, right? 'Cause it's all-
as a tangent. So in that kind of idea of crafting narratives and constructing things. But the idea of the event sponsored by the Australia-Japan Foundation is bringing Australian products to Japan. So when we finish up with our workshops and our events in Brisbane and Yokohama, one of the things that we're working on doing is a English to Japanese translation workshop, working with some of Isabel Carmody's novels. So working with translators and doing a translation workshop.
Isabel Carmody.
Obanatwan.
Where would I know? Is there anything on Netflix?
No.
So that's my only go-to kind of like.
God.
Is it on Netflix? Because then I can engage with it. How?
There is like
work?
an audience of women fantasy readers from the age of like 40s and under who, if they could hear you right now, Craig, if they could hear you right now.
I was dropping Tron references at the start. I think I've very much established my core demographic appeal. But so the name is Isabel.
So I'm just going to bring up the Wikipedia so that I can drop some names. So Isabel Carmody, she's a recipient of the Aurelius Award for Best Children's Fiction. Most well known for the Obanatwan Chronicles.
Obanatwan.
Published from 1987 through to, I believe, Aisling was the last one.
They're a Japanese author.
Australian author. High fantasy, lots of cats. She's also written. Oh no, there's more Obanatwan. Obanatwan is like the. I don't know, that one of those high fantasy series that has never actually ended. But she's since gone on to write the Legend Song Saga, the Quentaris Chronicles, and the Legend of Little Fur.
Where are they based?
Based in Queensland. Just finished a PhD at the University of Queensland and working on a doctorate, as well as being co-opted and stolen to use her work in various fantasy festivals.
So does she have a Japanese connection at the moment, or part of the plan is to translate her work into
Part of the
Japan?
plan is to translate her work into Japanese. I know that particularly the Legend of Little Fur. So the exhibition at the moment, you can go and see her illustrations for the Legend of Little Fur, as well as some of the puppets that she uses in the telling of this story. My understanding, and this is very much I think this is how the story goes, but I could be wrong. Little Fur is a fox spirit who has various adventures with a dragon-like creature.
Wow.
So more foxes, and again, it's complete. I hate the word serendipity, but it's complete serendipity that we have Isabel's Little Fur Chronicles. We've got Danielle Wood's Little Red Riding Hood stories. Mm-hmm. We had Tomoko Konoike's Fox Weddings in Sydney, and then this thing that happened in March 2022. It's the year of the fox wolf.
So Australia, I mean, it's interesting. A few weeks back, Zeke and I were talking about soft power,
Mm-hmm.
and about the only thing I could grasp onto from Australia's point of view was koala diplomacy, right? Whenever you have a president or a prime minister come down to Australia, they've always got a photo of them with a koala at a zoo, and it plays well to the international market. And that's the kind of extent of Australian cultural power, right? The koala. Yet you're pointing out here that we actually have quite a lot of great children's literature, children's fantasy in particular. I'm thinking Bluey, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, this is a children's author, right?
Isabel has written everything from YA to adult to children's picture books. As I said, so she's been...
The work you're thinking of translating, is it the YA stuff?
The work I think we're working on is this, the Legend of Little Fur books, which it looks like it's up to four books in the series published. From like early 2010s onwards.
And this translates like it's a kind of scholarly cultural act rather than working with a publisher or Routledge or someone. This is this is translation for the masses in the public sphere, or is it a commercial enterprise?
I think one thing that Lucy Masafumi and myself are kind of looking at is how to be an academic in the current world when pressures are shifting, demands are shifting, what's considered academic is shifting. And so this is kind of our experiment to see where we can take our interests, see where we can take our connections, and just kind of experiment with that.
And within the festival, what's the areas that you're most excited in? I can see that the Hobart material draws upon your great strengths with cosplay. There's the Icon Cosplay Photo Fest featuring Tessu, Blue Loon CP, who's new to me, and the Tazpop group. Maybe you could take us a bit through the Icon Cosplay Photo Fest.
Yeah.
Because that sounds spectacular.
It's so the Icon Cosplay Photo Fest, for anybody who has been around in the pre-Tazpop days, you might recognize that name, although it's Icon spelt correctly, not A-Icon. So in homage to older anime events in the state, we decided to call it Icon. There's also a really nice pun that it's a photo festival.
Right.
So it's iconic.
Yes.
Links to religious artwork with the name there. But it's a 2-day photo fest. It's the first of its kind, definitely in Tasmania, possibly, I believe, in Australia as well. And it's based on the photo fests that we've seen coming out of Europe. So Volta in Cosplay and Pixelmania, and the Wellington Cosplay Photo Fest in New Zealand. Each of those events are slightly different, but we've modelled ours on the Wellington Cosplay Photo Fest, where it's more like come to a small location, like a small city that offers multiple shoot locations, from the mountain to the cold shores of Nutgrove, to our wonderful array of Victorian buildings, to the brutalist architecture on campus.
So there's locations that people will, in costume, be accessing, like Mount Wellington, the mountain.
Yeah, there are people who are planning to go up Kunyani to shoot. I've been very worried about people not realizing that we need to respect the mountain. But basically, it's like it's kind of like a speed dating, but for photographers and cosplayers. So what happens is you apply, and hopefully there will be an event next year that people can keep in mind till when applications open. You apply either as a cosplayer or a photographer. You're given a shoot assignment. So the cosplayers this year, because of numbers, they were each assigned one shoot. The photographers each got 3 or 4 shoots. They kind of get together, decide what costumes they're going to shoot, what kind of location. We've given them a map, which has been annotated with, this is a good spot if you want to do something Victorian, or this spot kind of looks like castles, or...
Have you got an example?
So I went a bit ham on the university campus. So just looking around the university campus, there's a really beautiful camellia garden next to the Arts Lecture Theatre, which is bizarrely retrofuturistic. The Arts Lecture Theatre has these weird supports that come off it that double like something out of a 70s futuristic show.
Like an exposed ribcage of a dinosaur.
And so this kind of juxtaposition of the brutalist artwork and the brutalist architecture and the camellias, it makes a really classic, particularly Japanese 1970s sci-fi futurism.
I see, yeah, that kind of 1970s, because you've got, what are the flowers there? There's like some...
The tsubaki, the camellias.
The camellias. Yeah, flowers is the extent of my...
Alright.
What are they called again?
I have to think really hard to remember them in English.
What's the Japanese name?
Tsubaki.
Tsubaki. And tsubaki are important in Japan, aren't they?
Tsubaki,
are they important?
They are. They're a beauty symbol. They are usually winter flowering in Japan. And tsubaki oil or camellia oil has been really important in maintaining hair. So lots of traditions, lots of superstitions about hair. Again, if we go back to the 1100s, the Heian period is, I like it. It's fun. It's all about poetry and fashion and morning after sexy time poems and hair care. And you know, you have the fashion for women to have hair that is as long as they are tall, if not taller. And one of the ways that you protect your hair is by applying oil, only washing it on certain days that are determined as to whether or not they are beneficial days according to horoscopes, and also using rice water. So when you wash your rice, that water has
that milky
water. It's really good for your skin, and it's also
Really?
really good for your hair.
Can I do that as well?
Yeah.
Like, I mean,
There have been studies on Japanese housewives who are washing rice every day to cook the meals. I can't remember, I think it was a certain prefecture that they did a long-term study on, and it was found that the right hand of housewives was softer because of the way that they're using it to wash the rice
that's great.
every day.
So yeah, there are properties within the milky water that usually you just throw down the sink. Wow.
But yeah, if you keep that, it's apparently really good to then wash through your hair, and yeah, through prolonged exposure, it's apparently really great for your skin.
Okay. So here at the San Diego UTES campus, near the Arts Lecture Theatre, are the
Tsubaki. Or camellias.
And these tsubaki are great in terms of their traditional importance in Japan, but also good photo shoot.
Yeah, they're in flower at the moment, so that's a big plus.
Wow. So
you know, we've got other locations. If we look around on campus, what was I thinking about? The library itself has some great opportunities. If we go further into Hobart, we've got all of Salamanca with all of the Victorian buildings and architecture there. If you go up Kelly Steps, it kind of looks a bit like a rampart.
right.
So
The cosplay, does the cosplayer need to be, and this is already finished unfortunately for this round this year, but if it's successful there might be...
It'll be happening again next year, probably around the same time, because this is when Hobart's pretty.
Yeah, so there were a lot of cosplayers down at Taspop South. If I dressed up as Shrek and wanted to come along, there'd be locations, and they're like, okay, I'm looking for like a castle location, and you've mapped out, just this time around, a kind of map of these great backgrounds for different types of fantasy characters. So if you're doing, well, I mean, obviously some of the big examples that Tassie's had in the past have been the Ross Bakery.
Yep.
And if you're cosplaying as Kiki's delivery service, because the bakery has an uncanny similarity to the one featured there.
Yep.
You're not going as far afield as Ross Bakery this time.
Trying to keep it really local and particularly walkable. We've got quite a few photographers and cosplayers who are coming down from Melbourne, which I am just blown away by the concept that people would do that. So we've just tried to keep it really concentrated to Hobart City Centre, the Botanical Gardens, and then spots around Sandy Bay, like the Battery down in Taruna.
Yeah.
I think there's one shoot that's happening over at Kangaroo Bluff in Bellerive.
Yeah, that's right, because you've got that battery, the old where the gun emplacement was.
Yeah.
Which has that kind of wonderful ruins and
I mean the history of the batteries is amazing, and they crop up everywhere. There's another one just at, funnily enough, Battery Point. The boat park, Princess Park, was a battery.
Really?
Yeah.
And so there's all these great locations, some of which you've probably never looked at with these cosplay eyes. If people are interested to see what comes of this, is there going to be any exhibition or any online space?
There'll be an online space, and I'm going to try and talk to some of the cosplay magazines that have cropped up. So in Australia, there's a group running the OzCos magazine. They do a soft and a hard copy.
Ozcos
Ozcos
Magazine. Why have I
magazine.
never heard of this?
I don't know, Craig. Why have you never heard of
Because
this?
I am the media mothership from which everything is
Why
from.
don't you know?
That's right, it can't exist without it. Ozcos.
Ozcos.
That's spelled O-Z.
No, AUSCOZ.
A-U-S-C-O-Z.
Yeah, so I think subverting
Is it a
expectations.
zine? Is it a zine? Or?
It's a photo magazine. They publish an online copy and a hard copy, featuring different cosplayers each month, usually with a cover story and then various articles as well. They are on Instagram at Ozcos, sorry, with an S, Ozcos_mag on Instagram.
Wow. Yeah, again, even I'm learning stuff. We'll bring this up on the Twitch stream and YouTube stream so we can see it as well. But wow, what a little fantastic initiative that is. So you're going to link up with the Ozcos guys.
I mean that they're one of the groups that I'm going to try and link up to. If you are interested in contributing to their next issue, it is Heroes versus Villains.
Heroes versus Villains.
It looks like they're still accepting submissions.
This is at Ozcos.
This is at Ozcos_mag on Instagram.
Great.
Still a little plug there.
So with the Festival of Fantasy in Australia and Japan, does this cosplay get communicated to Japan as well? That's coming out of Hobart.
It may well do. I've been very fortunate to work with the World Cosplay Summit in Japan for a very long time now. It's coming up 5 years now. I've been working with the World Cosplay Summit, which, if you're unfamiliar with that, you can kind of think of it as I've heard it called the Weeb Olympics before. Brings together 40 countries, teams from 40 countries, gather in Nagoya in Japan in August, the worst month ever to be in Nagoya.
In terms of weather?
In terms of weather, it's hot and it's humid, and we have amazing cosplayers wearing leather and armor, and painting is always a worry. So they compete. They go over to become the World Cosplay Summit champion. It was recently held, I think 2 weekends ago. The 2022 competition was held. And this year was really interesting because it was a hybrid event. They had an on-stage component for the teams that could actually get to Japan. And Australia, we were very fortunate to get the Australian team there back in March. We didn't think that was possible. But we were able to send up an Australian team, and we came second in the stage division. And then for the other competing countries, there was a video division. Similar rules, 2.5 minute skits based on an anime, manga, or a computer game of Japanese origin. Just kind of either doing like a climactic battle scene or a love scene or something that kind of communicates the spirit of the story. It's a really fantastic time to be talking about this, actually, because while we will be running around Hobart with the Icon Cosplay Photo Festival, World Cosplay September 3rd to 4th, same weekend, World Cosplay Summit is sending 40 teams to Saudi Arabia.
Really?
For the first time. It's the first World Cosplay Summit event being held outside of Japan. So there are various heats, and they're like World Cosplay Summit Australia or World Cosplay Summit Italy. So this is the first time that something's being held outside of Japan that's branded as the World Cosplay Summit. As part of the Saudi, I think it is the Games 8 event, but I'm just going to pull up the Twitter so that I get the terms right.
So will this be bringing people from around the world?
Yeah,
to Saudi Arabia to compete?
Yes. So Gamers 8 in Saudi Arabia, we have 40 teams who are taking part in the World Cosplay Summit show. Same rules as the championships, and it's really exciting because we've got countries competing who have competed in the World Cosplay Summit finals for a long, long time. So countries like Australia, like Spain, like France, like the US. But we've also got countries that have never competed before. So this is their first World Cosplay Summit event. And it's happening at this kind of satellite event.
Wow.
Really exciting.
And we've even, I mean, Tassie's had obviously your own representation there, but
I've never been a rep. I've just been kind of like a grunt.
you've just been part of the entourage?
No, never. I've only ever worked it. So I've been in Japan as an interpreter and translator, and backstage.
Ah.
I've been working with World Cosplay Summit Australia this year as on the organising committee. But yeah, I've never actually been officially. But the Tasmanian team, Tess, who is our guest at Icon Cosplay Photo Fest, when she represented Australia in, I believe, 2013 or 2014. I'm not a historicist, I'm a literature person. When she represented Australia, she and her teammate Jess were the first Australian team to win an award, and they won the Brother Award for Best Costume, which pretty much, if you can't come first, you want the Brother Award for Best Costume.
Wow. Why is it called the Brother?
Because it's sponsored by Brother,
Okay.
makers of sewing machines and cutting machines and other technology.
Okay, yeah, good choice of a brand name. But yeah, no, that was fantastic. Because I remember like getting front page coverage of the Mercury magazine
Yep.
back in the day, and was so splashy in terms of really announcing Tassie's entrance into the world of cosplay. That we were
It
punching way
took
above our weight.
everybody by surprise. Nobody expected anybody from Tasmania to do anything on a national Australian cosplay scene, let alone to go on to represent Australia and to win such a prestigious prize. So they did a really good job. Since then, we've had like a kind of a ring-in. So the current, no, they're not current representatives. Australia's really confusing because we pick our representatives the year before. So when the competitors go to compete, the next year's competitors have already been selected. So we have Team 2022 and Team 2023 at the same time.
Right.
So the representatives for 2022, we can claim as half Tasmanian because one of the reps grew up down here, even though they moved to Queensland a long, long time. So
Still
sometimes
claim them.
we're allowed to claim them. Yeah,
And they're part of the 2022 team.
team that had been and come back, and the 2023 team was selected the week before the 2022 championships took place.
Zeke, shall we go for a short Vox Pop break? We have the pleasure here of playing to you, Emerald, a wonderful Vox Pops we did with you 2 or 3 or 4 weeks ago at the TASPOP South 2022 festival, which was happening. So we'll have a short break now listening to this Vox Pop with Emerald talking in costume at the time of what was going down during the day. Nice, thank you, Zeke. So really well, I am fascinated by your deep dives
My name is Emerald Elking, and I am wearing an alternate version of
into this world.
Kingdom Hearts.
It's perfect. And you not only
Oh God, no, I'm in sexy mode.
I am Dr. King, yes.
You were really good.
Various sins. I work in Japanese literature and East Asian popular culture.
Alright, so off the top of your
So
head right
the
now,
Oscars that you've got up there are mascot makers.
Mm-hmm. And they're not the people that we want.
We
Oh,
want
oh my God, just emptied Inuyasha.
AUS
those guys.
Very 90s,
cos.
very retro. And the
Mag.
content is, of course, retro.
I'm glad you're here.
you're the first person to remind me. Yeah.
Oh, here we go.
Okay, well, it was my big surprise for today. And
Well,
what's your
on
biggest
Instagram, I'll
surprise so
bring
far
up the.
today?
I was really expecting the
Oh,
retro
wow.
to be so different, but speaking of retro, it feels like an OG
Alright.
first generation anime con from like.
So I want to, I think we've got time. Yeah, we'll come out of this.
The first
We've
con that
got
I've been to in
30
Tasmania,
seconds.
it's been the first con for a couple of
Something
years,
cool.
but it
Oh, right now, minute 40.
Oh, great. So I want to look a little at the crafting.
So that's the exhibition. If we go down to
That's
the world
exhibition,
building
right.
day, that's the exciting bit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And because that also includes the crones,
Yep.
which I just love the name of.
This is like a mid-90s, late 90s, early 2000s kind of
Oh, right.
or start
So
of-
there's Riding the Fantastic from 1 to
Okay,
150.
so finally,
Conversations about wolves,
Really tricky
worlds,
one,
and everything in
and,
between.
most people
So
haven't gone through it.
it's a series of talks one after another at the
Yep. So it's 3 hours of workshops and then the knitting circle.
There is such thing as Tasmanian pop culture.
Okay.
The thing that comes to my mind, it's very obscure, but there used to be a...
yeah, so we'll chat about that, and that'll probably bring us to talking. Yeah, well, I'll mention that the Facebook page is up for the Ozcos magazine group
And the guy who worked on
to direct
and it's
people
kind of like his Hobart after
to.
dark experience with walking through Hobart, what he saw in the waterfront. So that kind of handmade zine culture, and I think we see a lot of crossover in that for events like this. A lot of handmade stuff, a lot of grassroots stuff, and yeah, there is something
30
that's very
seconds.
retro, and
Okay.
I want to say adolescent in the sense that
I wonder where that feedback was coming from. It must have been that, right?
It was that one, yeah, I muted this
a bit
computer.
more adult.
It's because we had Twitch on.
Yeah.
Perfect. Emerald, thank you so much for being part of Media Mothership for the day. You have a great convention.
10
Thanks
seconds.
again.
And we're back here on Media Mothership with myself, Dr. Craig, joined by B.A. Zeke, paneling today. You're doing great paneling, Zeke.
Thank you, I'm trying.
Yeah, except for the
nothing's
echo at the
broken.
start. Oh, well.
Yeah, nothing's broken yet. Well, the echo, yeah, but that was...
It's
I wasn't
fixed,
aware
it's
that it
fine.
was
Yeah.
wasn't muted, so you know, I'll take that on.
Yeah, you learn best through that. What is it? You remember one bad thing, and it takes 5 good things to push that out of your head. I've heard. So we'll say 5 great things during the course of the next half hour towards how well you're going.
I'll appreciate it.
And we're joined by Dr. Emerald King, who's taking us on a wonderful journey of the festival, the Fantasy in Australia Japan Festival, which has been touring. It's finished at Sydney component. Now it's in Hobart. is that-
Mostly finished in Hobart. We spoke before that delightful vox pop
Which is great.
about this idea of like Australian cute diplomacy, which actually I was talking to the Australian embassy in Japan and they're all like, yeah, koalas. That's it. Koalas.
Yes, yeah. That and probably Crocodile Dundee.
Yep.
If you have any, mainly American fans,
Yeah.
I'd say.
But I think if we're looking at a Japanese audience, there's also oddly a May Gibbs connection, and we're thinking of doing a Sydney event. We're trying to pull together another Sydney event that looks at Australian cute and Australian kawaii.
May Gibbs.
Of the Gumnut Babies fame.
Right, is that them? Her.
Yeah, that's
it.
her. Them.
May Gibbs, right, the Gumnut Babies. Yeah, everyone knows the Gumnut Babies.
Yeah.
Was that actually a children's book series, or was it just an image? Or
No,
series of
it's
images?
a series of
Gumnut
books and
Babies.
images.
Yeah.
The Gumnut Babies is probably the most famous story, but then you've got the Flannel Flower Babies and the Brownie
This was like
Babies.
1940s, I want to say.
1940s. There's quite a few very famous Australian young children's fantasy authors working at around the same time. So Pixie O'Harris is another one. A really fantastic article in The Conversation the other day by Michelle Thompson, who is a girl studies scholar and a fantasy studies scholar, looking at how in 1920s, 30s, there was a campaign to create an Australian fantasy. And I mean, part of it is very colonial to get rid of any idea or possibility of an indigenous fantastic. But the good thing that did come out of it is things like the Gumnut Babies, which has been translated into Japanese by Yagawa Sumiko, who herself was known as the, let me get the translation right. She was kind of like the most famous maiden or bishoujo, kind of like it's my head's trying to do a thing and it's breaking
Is she a
because
model or
so
actress?
she was a scholar and an author.
Okay, scholar, author, but also
Really heavily linked to fantasy and girl culture. She is perhaps best known as her translation of Alice in Wonderland is kind of like the authoritative translation of Alice in Wonderland. There are about 30 different translations, including this really bizarre, there's 5 really bizarre transliterations. And it's quite interesting that I'm talking about Alice in Wonderland as being bizarre.
just doubling down.
Doubling down. But as far as, well-known, really
Wow.
loved and renowned translations, the same person who was
And
doing May Gibbs also did Alice in Wonderland. So it takes it right back to that portal fantasy
So that
connection.
has some cultural resonance. It never got made into an anime or manga. Right?
No.
I mean, it didn't get to the. Was it like Moomin? Is that the kind
It
of
didn't.
series
No, it
from, like,
didn't get
Dutch?
adopted the way that Moomin or Miffy is another
Yes.
series that really got adopted. But people who know it really like it.
Mhm.
Apparently, it crops up in those kind of character stores that you get, like
Okay.
where you walk into like
Wow. You might
like-
just come across
yeah.
Gumnut Babies.
I think
'Cause it's kind of like a Cupies vibe to the Gumnut Babies.
very
right?
much a
It's got that-
Cupies vibe, so I can
Yeah.
understand why they would be popular.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. You know, I never encountered it, but it wasn't on my radar. And I'm just fascinated that there's that possible Gumnut Babies kawaii link and the Cupie. Yeah, there's definitely something to look into further there.
Isn't it fantastic?
Fantastic, very much the word of the day here on Media Mothership. We're joined, of course, by Dr. Emerald King and the Festival of the Fantastic in Japan and Australia, which is here in Hobart. Now, the real event starts on September 3rd, and one of the events which is open to the public is the world building masterclasses. Right, so this is happening on September the 3rd, 2022. Tell us a little bit about this.
This is something that one of the things I'm most excited to bring together. It is a series of free writers' workshops with amazing Australian talent. So writing with Danielle Wood, again, award-winning Australian author, teaching creative writing at the University of Tasmania, and she will be delivering a kind of extended metaphor, like just the kind of work that you've got to do before you build your world, like when you're figuring out what the world is, what are the touch points, what's the thing that you're changing. So really that kind of laying the groundwork for how one builds a world. We have a conversation between Lucy Christopher, again, award-winning author who grew up in Australia and the UK, has just moved down to Tasmania, writes everything from YA to adult fiction to picture books. She'll be talking with Isabel Carmody, author of Obener Twin Chronicles, and they will hopefully be kind of talking about world building and how one goes through that process. But they're great mates, and I think it's the first time that they'll be meeting in person for quite a few years. So it may just end up being a nice little chat between
And
author mates.
Both physically going to be here?
Both physically. So all of the events, all of the writers' workshops will be streamed online, so you can either attend in person or online. But yeah, we'll actually have people in a room together in our year of pandemic 2022. I almost said 2023. It's
And
not
they can-
2023 yet, is it?
No, not yet. They can get through that website, thefantasyartsfest.com.
Is that the website?
Fantasyartsfest.com.
Yes, fantasyartsfest.com. There is a Twitter, but it's really confusing.
We'll post the details up on our social media feeds, so if you are looking for links, come to Media Mothership on YouTube or Twitch or Facebook. Where else are we, Zeke? Instagram. Or pop into the UTAS Sandy Bay campus, 2nd floor, 3rd floor. Don't do that, you'll just get lost.
Yeah.
So okay, now one of the things that really amazed me on that September 3rd is the fact that there's going to be crones
Yes.
knitting needles. Like, is that kind of Shakespearean thing?
I mean, it could be. It could be. So we've got our two kind of hardcore writers workshops, writers masterclasses.
Do you need to be a writer to come along to those? Do you need to have pre-registered somewhere to join, or you can just rock up at the library?
So there is
the library?
so everything's at the Studio Theatre.
Studio Theatre. Where's
There,
that?
it's underneath the Stanley Burberry. It's where back in the day Icon
Really?
used to be. Yeah.
Stanley Burberry. Right.
Stanley Burberry. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the Sandy Bay campus.
Sandy Bay
University of
campus,
Tasmania.
University of Tasmania. So we've got our two writers masterclasses. We're also running a workshop with, again, award-winning Australian Tasmanian author Tansy Rayner Roberts, looking at art and the crowdfunding author. So based on her experiences with Kickstarter, walking through how to get people to pay you to write. And then, finishing off the day with what we're calling the Crohn's Knitting Circle, which is basically an opportunity to bring a crafting project. Doesn't have to be knitting.
Could be model airplane.
Could be model airplane.
'Cause that's what I'm trying to build.
Could be
It's
any
fun.
anything from your UFO pile.
Ooh,
So your
yeah.
your unfinished object pile, to kind of sit and craft and tell stories. So it's called the Crohn's Knitting Circle, but you do not need to be a crone or a knitter to apply.
Wow, the Crohn's Knitting Circle. I
Yeah.
love that idea.
Again, so the story of how this came about, I was invited Tansy and Danielle and Lucy into my very cramped office on campus, drinking out of a mix of my own teacups and these beautiful teacups that Danielle just brought along, just in case I didn't have proper teacups. And at one point she looks at me and says, "Emerald, we're having a Crohn's Knitting Circle. I don't know what that is, but we're having one."
It feels like a space which, power emanates from. Right? It's gonna be great.
I'm really excited to see how it goes, and who knows, maybe it will become a monthly feature.
Always needed, I think. Those kind of Crohn's Knitting Circles. So it's going to have a real makers culture vibe, hopefully.
Yeah, really looking at this idea of creating worlds, of crafting things, and so that's where the cosplay element comes in, is this idea of making stories through visuals, through photography, through costuming, and then of course through editing and photo manipulation.
And all centered and anchored around this idea of fantasy, linked to this term world building, which I always, I'm a fan of world building. I always like how Henry Jenkins defines this idea of, like, he's trying to explain why Pirates of the Caribbean and the Transformers movies matters, even though you've got a lot of critical complaining about these films as being kind of like there's no plot, the characters are really one-dimensional, there's all these kind of plot threads which don't get resolved. And Jenkins' argument was that this was a decentering of the typical Hollywood narrative, which usually is you've got to have a good plot and you've got to have key characters. That here it was the world, which was the most interesting part of those spaces. It was the Pirates of the Caribbean world, which was interesting, the myths that were being built around it, the Transformers text as well, that it was really the world which was interesting because there's no characters, or the characters are really one-dimensional, right? And so, it was a really interesting idea that maybe world building, like having a really interesting world, can be something to really pay attention to and to build up and to create well.
For me, the most fascinating thing about world building, now I'm a literary scholar, I am not a writer by any means. That's not one of my diverse talent sets. But I love the idea that when it comes to world building, you can create something entirely new where your characters are, I don't know, multicolored lobs of goo, and the tension of the story is whether or not broccoli will save the world. Or you can have a world that, upon first glance, it's exactly the same as what we're in, but there's like one key difference. So what happens if you have a world without shoes? Or where having some kind of eyewear is evil.
And there's a logic there, right? I guess the world building is about trying to then say, and it makes sense.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
It makes
you need
sense.
to
that
make
this
it make
makes
sense.
Yeah.
But think about it. If you take away eyewear, then that means that we lose anything to do with telescopes. We take away a lot of visual technology, because a lot of the technology that we take for granted in our phones, in our computers, it's stuff that was developed and comes out of technologies to correct vision.
Mm.
So if you take away these, early scientific discoveries, what stops or what changes?
And I guess what we're looking at is how do you make that a convincing world that won't just be dismissed. Well, there's the alarm
It's the alarm.
pointing out to us that, yeah.
I was wondering what that was.
Yeah, well, here in the studio, we've got a device which cleanses through, I don't know, ultrasonic magic.
Yeah. Oh, UV, I think.
UV.
Yeah.
We put on 1 hour, so we're at the hour time, so that's top of the hour. Here we are, Media Mothership. We've done, well done, Emerald. That was a lot of really interesting, fascinating deep diving.
I've been told that having a conversation with me is like having a conversation in a blender, because it just kind of goes from one topic to another. And I apologise if the threads were hard to pick up. Of course, the most important thread is to come along, get involved with the Festival of the Fantastic in Australian and Japanese arts. Full details at fantasyartsfest.com.
And if people are interested to find out more about you, Emerald, where can they find out more about you?
I am across several social medias at Emerald L. King. It's my legal name. You'll either get images of me, Weed Killer, or Pokemon Emerald.
Emerald L. King. And you, of course, are a lecturer here at the University of Tasmania in humanities. What field have they put you in? What have you got?
I am currently working across most of the humanities in gender studies, English literature, and Japanese. They haven't put me in history yet.
Yes. It sounds like you're heading towards that Renaissance scholar kind of breadth.
I have a lot of interests, and I get to do cool stuff. And for as long as the university employs me to do cool stuff, it's not bad. It's not a bad gig.
Emerald, thank you so much for coming along. Zeke, thanks for doing such a bang-up job paneling.
I hope everything was fine.
Yeah,
I'm very impressed.
Thank you.
Some good button pushing.
You didn't take us off air.
That's right.
But we
yeah.
know.
I felt very, behind. I just sort of zoned out sometimes, just looking at everything, but making sure nothing was broken. But, that's fine.
So keep listening here on Edge Radio 99.3 FM. We've got Adrian coming up next with his great retro 60s Brit pop material, as always. And this has been Media Mothership for another week with myself, Dr. Craig, joined by BA Zeke.
That's right. And you're listening to Edge of the Dark by Emmett Fenn, coming on right now.